Today's generation appears to be committed to living life to the full and living it now. Make the most of today's opportunities because they may not be there tomorrow. But it doesn't really matter whether you're 21, 41 or 71. Life is and always has been the most valued commodity in the world. Most of us want as much as we can get for as long as we can get. Yet sadly, few make it past the age of 70. But imagine life with no end, an existence without the boundary of time. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it?
Humanity has always been fascinated by its origins and curious about its ultimate destiny. And perhaps the most spectacular evidence of that quest can be found in the land of Egypt. Modern Egypt is a land that still fascinates. Cairo, the capital, is the largest city in Africa and the Arab world. In a country that is 96% desert, it has been said that Egypt is the Nile and the Nile is Egypt. Flowing from the heart of Africa, the Nile is the longest river in the world and provides vital irrigation water for cultivation. Egypt also boasts some world-class tourist resorts, such as this one at Sharm el-Sheikh. Here, modern-day Egyptians seek pleasure, relaxation, and eternal youth. But perhaps the greatest drawcard to Egypt is the fascination that ancient Egyptians had about living forever. Their culture and religion were based on it, and most of their energies were consumed preparing for it. The science of archaeology has recovered the history and culture of ancient peoples and their search for the afterlife. Egypt is one of the oldest civilizations in the world. In surveying this country's long history, one gains a new concept of time. Their search for immortality led to the construction of the world's largest pyramids and temples. Modern Egyptians have not lost their longing for the spiritual. Like their ancestors, their search for immortality continues. Most of the world's religions can be found in Egypt today. In fact, Cairo is the center of Islam in northern Africa, and its medieval district has some of the finest Islamic architecture in the world. But can the Egyptians' millennia-long obsession with immortality help prepare us for death and the afterlife? Is it possible that their quest might also tell us something about how we can live life to the full, right here and now, on the threshold of a new millennium?
For the ancients, the afterlife was as much a spiritual journey as their day-to-day worship of their king and gods. And in a strange way, they did discover something about immortality.
In an effort to preserve the body for life after death, the Egyptians developed a procedure known as mummification. Upon death, the body was covered with tar, wrapped in hundreds of metres of linen interspersed with oils and spices, and placed in a wooden coffin inscribed with prayers and magical incantations to guarantee safe arrival to the world of the dead. The Egyptians believed that this life was a preparation for the world to come.
It's hard to believe, but for 500 years, this was the proud capital of Egypt. Memphis was founded by Narmer, the first king of the first dynasty of Egypt. Today, Memphis is an open museum, with monuments brought here from their original positions. Only a few relics have survived, like this colossal statue of Ramses II.
The kings of Memphis were buried a few kilometres away at Saqqara. The earliest form of royal grave was an underground chamber at the bottom of a shaft. It was covered by a brick or stone structure called a mastaba. Zoser, the first king of the third dynasty, decided to put a series of mastabas on top of one another, an early attempt to assure his departure from this world into an immortal future.
The result was the world's first pyramid. It was a stepped structure built in 6 stages and standing 63 metres high.
Of all the pyramids in Egypt, the ones at Giza inspire the greatest awe. Built by the kings Khufu, Khafre and Menkaure of the 4th dynasty, they are among the most impressive structures ever built. According to an ancient Egyptian proverb, everything fears time, but time fears the pyramids. They are the only one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world that still remain. Khufu built the Great Pyramid to be his eternal home. It's a concept that was of paramount importance to the ancient Egyptians. For the king's quest for immortality reflected the whole nation's desire for never-ending life. His eternal happiness was their guarantee of prosperity in this life and the next.
The grand hope of immortality is mirrored in the incredible size of the Great Pyramid. It stands 42 stories high and covers an area of 10 football fields.
It's hard to imagine just how much stone is actually here. There's about 2.5 million blocks, each weighing around 2.5 tonnes, though some weigh up to 15 tonnes. No 2 sides are identical in length, but the difference between the longest and shortest sides is only 20 centimetres. Amazingly, each side faces exactly north, south, east and west.
When the pyramids were first built, the rough stones that can be seen today were covered with gleaming white limestone. They certainly would have been a very impressive sight. Unfortunately, they've been removed over the centuries to build homes, bridges and other buildings around the city of Cairo. The apex of the Great Pyramid is missing, so it's 10 metres lower than its original size. But the question is often raised, how long did it take to build these massive monuments?
The Greek historian Herodotus claimed that 100,000 men working for 3 months each year took 30 years to build the pyramid. Interestingly enough, generally the pharaohs didn't even live that long. Today there is evidence to suggest that the pyramids were built within a much shorter time frame.
It's very important for people to understand that the pyramid was the national project of Egypt. And everyone, the 1 million people, the population in Egypt in that time, had to participate in building the pyramid. Some to cut the stones, some to move the stones, some to send the food, because of the national project. The Great Pyramid was built for about 23 years. All the stones for the pyramid were taken from the plateau, except the white fine limestone. They brought it from a place called Tora.
Irrespective of the time it took to build them, they are magnificent structures and very carefully designed to preserve the body of a king.
That was what the pyramids were all about. Great mountains of stone to bury the dead so that nobody could get at them. And it was very important to the Egyptians that their bodies be preserved. Their concept of life after death was that the Ka, as they called it, K-A, left the body, but it came back to the body, and if the body wasn't there, that was disastrous. So they had to mummify the body to preserve it. They had to build pyramids to protect it from animals, jackals, and also from tomb robbers. And so all these complex passages were designed to thwart the tomb robbers. It didn't work. Not one of them was successful. No mummy of the Pyramid Age has ever been found. The mummies you see in the Cairo Museum, they come from the 18th, 19th dynasty onwards, and they were from the Valley of the Kings.
The king is buried underneath the pyramid. He will use the pyramid as a stairs to go up to the sun god Re. Then the pyramid shape is a symbol of the sun god. When you enter from the Amun entrance, you will go left through a corridor about 100 meters length that lead you to the first burial chamber. This burial chamber is not finished. And after that, if you go from this room up, you will go through a corridor about half a meter high that leads you to two things. One, the so-called Queen's Chamber, which is also unfinished. And of course, you will be in front of the most magnificent thing that an architect made. And it leads you to the burial chamber. It's made of granite from Aswan, and it has inside two shafts. They call it air shafts, but they are not really air shafts. They are model corridors for the soul of the deceased king to go through, one to join the stars and the other one to join the boats that are located, two on the south side, that the soul of Khufu Azra will take one boat to the trip of the day and the other boat to the trip of the night.
The next king was Khafre, who built his pyramid next to that of his father. His pyramid still preserves part of the smooth outer casing which once covered all the pyramids. Because of the problem of tomb robbers in those days, Khafre tried a new tactic to secure his tomb. Using a rocky knoll at the base of the pyramid, his workmen carved a lion 73 metres long and 20 metres high. Carved onto the body was Khafre's face. It was intended to scare away tomb robbers. But the Sphinx failed to protect the pyramid. Long ago its contents were taken. However, the era of grandiose and lavish monuments did not last throughout the entire Egyptian period.
The close of the 4th dynasty saw the end of the expensive stone pyramids and the introduction of new mud brick structures simply faced with stone. A good example is this pyramid here at Saqqara, built by Unas of the 5th dynasty.
To guarantee his immortality, hieroglyphic pyramid texts were inscribed on the chamber walls, and priests prayed for him in the nearby temple. Interestingly, at this location is a relief showing people praying to the gods for food during a disastrous famine. Other inscriptions record that the community had known about this famine in advance and that it lasted for 7 years.
Mentuhotep was the powerful prime minister at the time. He was revered as the giver of good and the sustainer of life.
Some scholars have suggested that this might be the Joseph referred to in the Hebrew scriptures, who distributed food to people during the 7 years of famine.
The largest canal in Egypt runs from the Nile River into the Fayoum Oasis. It's called Joseph's Canal. The Antiquities Department claim that it derives its name from the Joseph of the ancient scriptures.
Despite the life-threatening famine, the kings of the later 12th dynasty continued their relentless search for life after death. They built pyramids next to Joseph's Canal. But the question remains, who made the bricks and provided the labour for these pyramids?
The bricks may have been made by Israelites forced to build this pyramid.
For the pharaohs, the key to the search for life after death was the continuation of their ruling line. But King Amenemhet III had no sons, only a daughter, and she had no children. Would the dynasty end and his immortal memory perish?
I was in the Petrie Museum and I happened to notice this replica on display. It's a replica of Amenemhet III. And this would have been the man whose daughter went down to the River Nile and found this little baby. Now, why was she there? We know that this man's daughter, whose name was Sebek-Neferu, had no children. Now, that means if the dynasty died out because she had no children, it would be disastrous. And so she would be down at the River Nile praying for a baby because the river god, Hapi, was the fertility god. And if you need a baby, well, that's the god you need. And she would be down there praying for a baby, and lo and behold, here comes this beautiful little baby in a basket. I mean, it seems strange to make an Israelite slave a future pharaoh. But when you understand that the Egyptians were very pious and they attached a lot of importance to this sort of thing. And so she would have chosen this baby as her next heir because she had no children of her own. Well, of course, you know what happened in the course of time. Moses showed his true colours and he fled from Egypt. And sure enough, when her father died, she became the last pharaoh of the 12th dynasty. And of course, when she died, the dynasty died. That was the end of the dynasty.
In his search for the meaning of life and the hereafter, the Hebrew scriptures tell us that Moses had decided to look elsewhere. Soon after, we find that Egypt was devastated by a series of plagues, as outlined in the Ipuwer papyrus in the Leiden Museum. The papyrus contains an Egyptian account of the 10 plagues, which fell on the country when the king of Egypt refused to release the slaves. Eventually, after the death of his son, the king ordered Moses to take the Israelites and go. The Israelites fled to freedom through the Red Sea. When the king tried to follow, he and his army perished beneath its waves. For the next 4 centuries, Egypt was plunged into its dark ages, and the Egyptians themselves became slaves. Eventually, the Amu were driven back out of the land, and the kings of the 18th dynasty established a new kingdom. They made their capital 800 kilometres south of Cairo at a place now called Luxor.
Here at Luxor on the east bank of the Nile is the city of the living. Houses and public buildings made of mud bricks surrounded the royal palace. Today they're almost all gone, but the vast temple remains.
A processional avenue of human-headed sphinxes still connects the Luxor temple to the Karnak temple, the largest ever constructed.
This hyper-style hall was built by Seti I and Ramses II. It was used for religious celebrations and the coronation of new kings. Inside, 134 of these huge pillars stretch metres into the sky.
On the temple wall is an inscription written by King Thutmose III. It pictures the treasures captured from a place called Qadesh, a city in Palestine many believe to be Jerusalem. After ransacking the city, Thutmose hoped to advance his own claim for immortality by dedicating the spoils to the god Amun. Among the treasures he brought back were brass dishes and 300 golden shields. Interestingly, the Bible also mentions 300 shields, which were originally placed in the sanctuary by King Solomon.
Some scholars consider that King Shishak, mentioned in the ancient scriptures, could well be Shishonk I. If so, then this inscription written by the king would be further evidence of the historical accuracy of the scriptures.
To preserve their bodies for immortal life, the kings of the 18th and 19th dynasties chose to be buried in secret. Their last journey was across the Nile River to a place called the Valley of the Kings.
These two colossal statues of King Amenhotep III greet visitors to the city of the dead. They're the only remains of his mortuary temple, where priests brought food and drink to sustain him in the underworld and to pray for his immortal life. Here at Deir el-Bahari is the temple of Queen Hatshepsut, one of the most remarkable women in history. When her husband died, Hatshepsut not only took the throne of the king, but also assumed the title and prerogatives of a pharaoh, including wearing a false beard.
Hatshepsut ruled for 21 peaceful years. During her reign, she visited a country she calls God's land. Some scholars have suggested that this could have been the land of Israel during the time of King Solomon. Perhaps here she heard about a different secret to immortality, that life doesn't consist of material possessions alone, but that attitudes and relationships are also important. The Egyptians always buried their dead facing west. They believed that the soul of the dead king would join the sun god in the west to accompany him in his nightly journey through the underworld. It was the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 that captured the world's imagination. Tutankhamun, which means Amen gives life, became king at the age of 9. His name didn't help him live any longer, unfortunately, for he died when he was only 18. A hastily prepared tomb was dug in the floor of the valley. After it was sealed, rock chippings from a later tomb were dumped on top and hid it so well that it was the only royal tomb discovered intact. With the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, for the first time, modern civilization had the opportunity to view untouched treasures and perhaps uncover ancient secrets about the pharaoh's afterlife. After years of searching, archaeologist Howard Carter dug in the last and least likely spot in the Valley of the Kings. Almost immediately, his workmen uncovered a step cut in the rock. He dug down and found 16 steps leading to an underground corridor. At the end was a sealed door. Cutting away a portion, they peered inside.
They stood here in astonishment. Treasures everywhere, untouched for 3,000 years. Their finds sent shockwaves throughout the world.
A golden shrine completely filled Tutankhamun's burial chamber. The size of a garage, it was the first of 4 wooden boxes. They were overlaid with gold and carved with reliefs. Inside the 4th box was a quartzite sarcophagus with a lid of rose-coloured granite. Lifting the lid, Howard Carter found a wooden coffin overlaid with gold, showing the boy king in the form of the god Osiris. A second golden coffin was inside the first. Within that was a third coffin made of solid gold weighing 110 kilograms. When the lid of the third coffin was raised, Carter saw the mummified body, undisturbed for thousands of years. The mummy was covered with jewellery and precious stones. A wreath of dead flowers was around the boy's neck, possibly placed there by his grieving widow. On his face was the death mask of beaten gold, inlaid with hundreds of precious stones. Above his forehead were the emblems of royalty in solid gold, the vulture and cobra.
The staggering wealth of Tutankhamun's tomb still fascinates the thousands of people who come to witness it each year.
The treasures of Tutankhamun are the masterpieces of the first floor in the museum. We have about 4,000 pieces, and there are some other pieces in the Museum of Luxor, because these objects were discovered in Thebes or in Luxor. So we wanted to show the visitors of Luxor some flavors of the treasures of King Tutankhamun. And we still have some objects in the storerooms.
But while Tutankhamun achieved some kind of immortality through his wealthy possessions, today his remains lie where they were placed centuries ago, in his tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Only these treasures live on.
The ancient Egyptians sought to escape the finality of death. For just like us, they wanted to live forever. The rites of mummification, the building of pyramids, the worship of gods in huge temples, the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, the burial of treasure, all were designed to guarantee everlasting life after death. But did these ancient Egyptians really discover the secret of immortality? For them, immortality was a continuation of the wealth and status experienced in this world. They tried to achieve this by taking their treasures of gold, silver and slaves with them. Not much has changed over the centuries. Some of us work for a lifetime to finance large houses, establish even larger bank accounts, and drive the latest and fastest cars and boats. We surround ourselves with expensive furniture, electronic gadgetry, and souvenirs of overseas holidays, and every conceivable item to make life easier. But as the Egyptians discovered, we can't take our possessions with us. The question remains, when this life ends, what lies beyond? Surely there must be more to existence than what the Egyptians found.